The kids call it today the Dixie Rock because Dixie's written on it, but it was a Sugar Loaf, and it'll always be the Sugar Loaf.
Oh, once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a weekly podcast sharing the stories of a place known as Utah's Dixie, and brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation. Through stories as universal as they are personal, this podcast is dedicated to the memory of legendary family physician Dr. Craig Booth and to defining, preserving, and perpetuating the spirit of Dixie embodied in his life and work.
Hi, I'm Lyman, host of the Not Forgotten podcast. For more than 40 years, I've been writing and publishing with the intent of connecting landscape and story in the American Southwest. I believe the words spoken by a character in a story by Barry Lopez. Everything is held together by stories, he said. That is all that is holding us together, stories and compassion. Dr. Craig Booth was a man of stories and compassion. His personal story is one of the many that have made Utah's Dixie what it is, and his compassion is at the heart of that elusive entity we call the Dixie Spirit. Today's episode is really special. I feel so honored today to have in the studio Dan McArthur, a dear friend, a mentor, someone I've admired and respected and appreciated all of my life, and someone who has distinguished himself as really a man of Dixie. That Dixie spirit is, I think, in every cell of his body and in every part of his soul. And Dan, we need to start by saying you were mayor of this city, this town, for 20 years.
20 years, from 1994 to 2015. 14, excuse me, when I ended.
Wow. And so much other public service that you have been involved in. But mayor of this city during those really crucial transitional years when so much was happening here and so much was changing. And you somehow miraculously kept that Dixie spirit ingrained in everything that was happening here.
Everything to me is Dixie. Brigham Young called those first 309 heads of family, he called them to the Dixie mission. It was Dixie then, it stayed through all the time, and that's why it remains so clear to me, Dixie.
That's awesome. And I lured you here today under the pretense of talking about the Sugar Loaf.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about the Sugar Loaf. That's really the topic for today. But that Sugar Loaf, as we're going to find out, and I realize many people listening don't have a clue what I mean when I say Sugar Loaf. We're going to define that and also look at how that place, that physical feature, really, you could almost call that the heart of Utah's Dixie, that red bluff, that red huge rock on top of the red hill directly north. It's really almost right up Main Street. But Dan, you, like all of us who grew up here, that was a special place for you, I'm sure.
I just lived on 500 East, about 269 South 500 East. So we played on the Red Hill a lot as kids. We'd go up past the Dairy Queen, past Rocky Mountain Produce, and climb up to the top of the hill and roll some rocks and throw rocks and do that and see. We had a goldfish cave. There was a lot of things on the face of that cliff all the way from east to west, from the East City Springs clear over to Watercrest Springs. Yeah, those were places we town boys played all the time.
You are the great-grandson of Daniel D. McArthur,
Mm-hmm. Daniel Duncan
McArthur. That is your name.
Mine's Daniel Dalton. His was Duncan.
Daniel Dalton McArthur. You're Daniel D. McArthur of another generation. When you were up on that hill, did you have any idea that I'm sure that your family called that rock the Sugar Loaf?
Always. They've never known as anything else. The kids call it today the Dixie Rock because Dixie's written on it. But it was a Sugar Loaf, and it'll always be the Sugar Loaf. And
Did you have any idea that who actually named it?
I never paid attention to it until I got a paper. Mary Phoenix was writing articles about Dixie and St. George and history. And Mary was she was an English teacher and taught in my high school. And she talked a lot of things about it. And she wrote that. And when I got a hold of that, I said, that's interesting. I'm related to that guy.
I'm going to share these words of Mary Phoenix. But first, let me just say, you said she was an English teacher, and she was. And it just strikes me as we're sitting here, I do not think I would be sitting here today if it weren't for Mary Phoenix. She was my fourth grade teacher at East Elementary. Mm-hmm. She read books to us. The one that I remember most vividly is Charlotte's Web.
Oh, yes.
She ingrained in us this sense of story and books and how special they are. And then when I got to Dixie High School, she was an English teacher there.
That's where she was my English teacher.
And as sitting in her English class was a great experience. And I didn't have any clue at that time that I would be writing or make my living as a writer later in life. But I think that's where it really started. And it's fun to come back to things that Mary wrote.
Well, to me, Lyman, you're just a lot of copy about her because you have that same demeanor, the same spirit when you talk about these stories that mean so much to you that she did and imported to us. And even reading those like Charlotte's Web and the other things, she instilled that in us because of the way she loved it and she presented it to us. And so I remember her very vividly.
That's awesome. And I think I'm making a mental note right now that we'll do an episode on Mary Phoenix in this podcast at some point where many of us can sit down and really not just remember her and look at what she did, but just pay tribute to her as a great lady. But let me read this. It's written in her special way. I think it was probably part of maybe a reader's theater or something, the way she's written it here. But this is going to tell us why the Sugar Loaf is called the Sugar Loaf and who named it the Sugar Loaf. And it gives it away right at the very first line. President Daniel D. MacArthur is credited with naming the Sugar Loaf on top of the Red Hill. Almost all of our early pioneers were from the British Isles, and as you know, England was a tea-drinking nation. Before we go any farther, let us stop and remind you that up until the regime of Church President Heber J. Grant, the word of wisdom was a suggested recipe for good health, and so the English people continued to enjoy their cup of tea, as they called it. When the call to Dixie came, they knew it would be at least a year before they could get any supplies, so they used some of their limited resources to buy and stock up what tea they could. Sugar was another matter. English people were used to the resources of their cane-producing colonies. Sugar came in a big red lump, shaped like a bowl, and was called a sugar loaf. This sugar loaf sat on the kitchen table, and each member of the family broke off a chip at tea time. Refined white sugar was expensive and was purchased at the apothecary or drugstore by the spoonful or cupful. In Deseret, which was the original name of what is now Utah, any sugar was very expensive, so very little sugar made the trek southward. When the tea was gone, the people had to accept a bitter substitute concocted from local shrubs and humorously called Brigham tea. The lack of sugar became the focus of all female complaints in southern Utah, from flies to famine to smallpox. Every evening, the man returning home from work was greeted by, "I could stand anything if I only had a little sugar for my tea." President MacArthur solved that problem one Sunday as all of the faithful were gathered as usual in the Bowery across the street north of the Tabernacle. After a few testimonies from the good brothers about how thankful they were for the gospel, President MacArthur arose and thundered forth, "Why can't you sisters be thankful for all we have, as the brothers are? No, all you can do is complain. Complain about sugar. Look out that window. There's the biggest sugar loaf in the world, and still you complain." Meeting dismissed. These people, fresh from the green hills in their native land, had never seen much beauty in their new environment, but now they looked. The big thing on the northern hill did resemble an English sugar loaf. They say that in those days, every domestic argument in southern Utah was ended when the man solemnly intoned, "Sugar Loaf." What the women thought has never been recorded. We call it the Sugar Loaf because we always have. Most people do not know that we owe this picturesque appellation to the desperation of President Daniel D. MacArthur. And here I sit with Dan MacArthur, President Daniel D. MacArthur's great-grandson. Respond to that, Dan.
Every time I've read that and seen, I've told that story many times because I've come across that a long time ago. And then I set it aside, like a lot of your things you put aside. And one day I picked up these things going through the papers, and I found that again. I says, I got to tell this more about our ancestors, because that's what our community is. Why it's Dixie is because not just the ones that settled here. It's because of all those others between there and here. You get down to Carl Brooks, that served as a mayor for 12 years before I became mayor, and all the others, whether it's Barlocker or whether it's Bowler or any one of those, have all contributed to what the Dixie spirit and what we call Utah's Dixie. In fact, I'll tell you a really cute story if you want to hear that. I joined Rotary pretty young. My dad was a Rotarian, and there we had, what was the college presidents back then? Anyway, he was part of our Rotary Club, and in horseplay, would charge everybody a quarter, not very much, but he got up. Farron Losey was the president when I went through college, and he would say, I make a motion that we change the name of St. George to Dixie. Why would you ever have a D on the hill and a Dixie up on the rock up there if that isn't what it is? And they said, no, that is because it's Washington County. Anybody below the Iron County line, like this song that Mary Phoenix put, Program Bureau, it was anything below the Iron County line is Dixie. And so it always failed in Rotary. You couldn't change the name of St. George to Dixie because there was Santa Clara and all these other communities that are part of Dixie, so we couldn't name our community Dixie.
And that's a great definition of the, at least from a geographical perspective. It's not just St. George, it's all of this southwest corner of the state.
Yep, that's right. All the southwest in Washington County is Dixie. And we need to tell the story and use it more often, the words, because sometimes you get in this new generation, people come in, if they don't hear the stories, then they don't really become part of the community until you know your stories, then this is my community. But if they don't get involved with that, then it becomes other things and they get off on other tangents because you'll lose the future if you forget the past and you don't celebrate the past. So I appreciate you and others that do these things like this, bringing to mind all of us what it is and what does it mean to all of us. And if they hear those stories that we talk about like this one, then they'll get the spirit and they'll start talking about it.
Dan, you've shared the spirit with thousands of people over the years, but one of the most effective ways you've done it is by singing.
Are you from Dixie?
Would
ready?
you share that for us?
Let's do it. Okay.
Okay.
Are you from Dixie? I said from Dixie, where the fields of cotton beckon to me. I'm glad to see ya, to say how be ya, and the friends we're longing to see. If you're from Santa Clara, Washington, or St. George Fine, anywhere below the Iron County line, then you're from Dixie. Hurrah for Dixie, 'cause I'm from Dixie too. And we sing that at every groundbreaking, every ribbon cutting. I sang it in council a lot of times. I just had Rolling to Fury, wrote that to that old tune, and it's a catchy tune. You name the city on either side of it because it's fine that rhymes with line. It's not the name of the city. So anyway, I love to do it, and people still ask me that. I've had like president, he helped us get to this university status. President, why can't I think of his name? But anyway, he was coming through one day after his wife was having a birthday party and in the Black Bear restaurant, and I was there too. And when he walked by, he said, "Are you from Dixie?" And I said, "Yeah." We started singing, so we got up together and just sang "Are You From Dixie" out loud. And everybody applauded.
Was that President Nadal?
Nadal, President Nadal. And what a great man he was and is, and his wife. But I remember going down when he come into town, I made a special effort. I think I went down in my work clothes and greeted inside of the fountain on the college. Him and his wife stood there, and so I caught Jerry Atkin and said, "Jerry, you got to come over with me. He needs to hear this song." And so when he got there, him and I sang it out loud to him and his wife, and I said, "You'll have to know this." And he did. He grabbed that. Later, he invited the Tabernacle Choir down there, and they let me go sing with them, and they sang that song.
So you've sung that song with the Tabernacle Choir?
Yes. I got some pictures to show it. I was in the Tabernacle Choir one time, and it even tickled my wife. She didn't even know I was going to go there. I just got up, went over, got in the middle of them.
I can't think of anything more. Just we can talk, but when we reach the level of singing, it's so far beyond words. And the way you've shared that over the years has touched the hearts of so many. And I think that generations to come need to feel that and know that, even though those of us who were born here are a very small minority, everyone here can and really should become part of that Dixie spirit.
Get that Dixie spirit in their blood, and it's enthusiasm, excitement. It's not about anything that's negative. It's positive and build up. And it's always been that way, and it should remain the same for everyone. That's what Rowan DeFury would be called to ask people to invite groups to come in, and she'd take program bureau from the college, and they'd sing and participate, and Marion Bowler was a singing mayor, and he'd sing, and others, and other youth that hadn't performed, but they all performed and did well. And she would not leave until everybody was excited and enthused before she'd get up. Because she was a large lady, and when she sat down on the piano bench, she occupied the whole bench. But she was just filled with the Dixie spirit, and she built it a lot in each one of us, too.
So much of that Dixie spirit, Dan, comes from those earliest days of deprivation and isolation that your great-grandfather, my great-grandparents, they came here and really just eked it out, especially those first 10 years. They just had to work their way out of poverty completely. And so when we talk about the Dixie spirit, we're always talking about it in a joyful way, but it began in really tough times.
Yes, it did.
And I'm thinking of another song that you like to sing of Charles Walker. That kind of takes you back to
St.
that.
George and the Dragon.
Yeah.
It's not a dragon, it's the dragon. And I sing that a lot, too, because I love it, because it was true. And it was really made for Brigham Young. A visit that Brigham Young was coming down in 1869, actually. St. George had only been settled. They got here in 1860, ended 1861, and we were chartered on January the 16th, 1862, by the territorial legislature, the 13th city in the whole territory, to be named and given a post office and all that. And anyway, that's why he wrote this song, because when Brigham Young come down, and there's two things in it. One place it says "Sir," and I'll say that when I sing it, and that was Brigham Young was "Sir." And it says, "Oh, what a desert place was this when first the Mormons found it. They said no white man here could live, and the Indians prowled around it. They said the land, it was no good, the water was no gooder. The bare idea of living here was enough to make men shudder. Mesquite, soap, root, prickly pear, and briar. St. George ere long will be the place that everyone admires. The sun it is so scorching hot, it makes the water sizz, sir." Brigham Young. "And the reason that it is so hot is just because it is, sir. The wind with fury here doth blow, that when we plant or sow, sir, we place one foot upon the seed and hold it till it grows, sir. Mesquite, soap, root, prickly pear, and briar. St. George ere long will be the place that everyone admires." Now, green lucerne. Lucerne is the gasoline of those days. That was the hay, fed the oxen and the horses and everything. Now, green lucerne in verdant spots bedecks our thriving city, while vines and fruit trees grace our lots with flowers sweet and pretty. Where once the single blades of grass grew a mile apart in distance, it kept the crickets on the hop to pick up their subsistence. Mesquite, soap, root, prickly pear, and briar. St. George ere long will be the place that everyone admires. And so it has. Everybody, when I was mayor, they would always say, I'd ask them about that. And how do you want to come to St. George? There's only two types of people, those that live here and those that want to or are going to. When I was first elected mayor, it was 29,000. When I ended, it was 85,000 after 20 years. So that is, and all the projects that come around, getting our first convention center, all these kind of things involved all the community, and whether it was all the service clubs, all of them got together and had a big Dixie project where we put in the encampment mall and other things around the city and planted a lot of trees. That was from religious groups, not just LDS, but everyone got pitched in.
And that's the Dixie spirit.
That's the Dixie spirit.
Building, lifting, creating without necessarily going to government sources, but as grassroots, bringing things together. The city and county and state have become very much involved in all of these things, but most of the really great things of Dixie started at grassroots level.
Yes, it did, and you can see why, and that's why people are still saying the same thing. When I was mayor, I sang that a lot. I went up and sang it to the legislature. I sang it with kids. I sang it at Dixie High School. That was the only high school we had. When I was there, I graduated in Dixie High School, and then Pineview came. I went over to Pineview and sang it. I said, this is not about Dixie High School, whether it's Pineview or Snow Canyon or Hurricane, any one of those. It's Dixie, and you are a Dixieite, and you're here. So we're not singing about those schools. We're singing about this Dixie spirit that brings all of us together here in this great community.
But that took a lot of audacity for Charles Walker to write that line, "St. George ere long will be a place that everyone admires," because at the time he wrote that, it was
1869.
It was the end of the earth.
That's right.
Hot, alkali, isolated.
It took more than a week to get here from Salt Lake.
The people who lived here were barely surviving at the time he wrote those words. And yet today they're absolutely true. Yeah. Everyone admires this place.
And it's a catchy tune, too. People sing it, and get them to join in and sing the song of St. George and the Dragon.
And the other song that is so deeply ingrained, let me go back, though, first. When I was, and maybe it was this way for you too, Dan, when I was in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, we learned those songs. That when you sing those songs, it takes me back to I think Howard Putnam came to our kindergarten class and taught us those songs. And that I want to pay tribute to Howard, who just died in the last few weeks.
Great man.
At the age of, I think, 100 or close to.
He was over 100.
Over 100.
Yes.
But I remember vividly learning those songs and having this sense of pride about where I lived.
Yep.
There were songs that were written about my town.
That's exactly right.
It was really special. And the one that strikes my heart most deeply is George Hick's song, which we use as our theme song for this podcast. And actually at the end of the podcast, you'll hear a really beautiful rendition of that that Ricky Valadez has put together, has arranged, and then added one verse and a chorus that kind of brings us full circle with that song.
It's great.
But it's great to be able to visit with you, Dan. And let's come back to the Sugar Loaf.
Sugar Loaf, yeah.
That's the heart of what we're talking about here. I remember going up there as a scout. There's the old scout cave. I don't know that we ever actually camped up there, but I know that generations before me camped at that scout cave. I remember the narrows that I could go through 50 years ago, but now I don't fit anymore.
Fat man's misery, huh?
But more than anything, I just remember climbing up on top of that rock and looking down over the city and just being in awe.
It still is an inspiring sight as you look down there. Now the temple, the LDS temple down there, has been renovated and now operational. Now you can see out the Red Cliffs Temple out there, but you can see all these other spires and steeples of other groups. One of the things that I would just like to mention is that's where we had the Interfaith Council in St. George, about 17 or 18 communities, religious groups, and it started in that little shade down underneath there. Jimmy Keston did that in the Foursquare Fellowship, and then he started doing it where they have a prayer over the city on New Year's Day. And it finally come down into, after a first night activity, it was really cold down in the town square area that we had that. And I says, why don't we just move it over into the tabernacle? The tabernacle's empty, let's talk to them. And they opened it up, and that's where it's held every year on New Year's Day at noon, where all of them are offered on things, maybe we don't agree on theology, but the things we do agree on, whether it's education, maybe it's safety, maybe it's police protection, it's streets, all the people like that, they offer prayers over our community. And it's just nice to see people come together on things that it mean a lot to us, our community. And that's how we get along.
And that is part of the Dixie spirit.
That is exactly.
It's not, the Dixie spirit is not confined to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or to any aspect of religion. It's community. And what you started there, you and others started with the Interfaith Council, is such a great example of that we're all here together. We all can, and maybe others might define it differently or use different terminology, but for us, that's the Dixie spirit.
That's the Dixie spirit. It's there. And I had people one time come from up in Iron County and said, are you making fun of us because you say below the Iron County? I said, no, get your own song. This is a Dixie song for Washington County.
Or move below the
That's
line.
right, because I love those people. I have relatives up there in Parowan, all those things.
Some of the greatest Dixieyites are people who have moved from above that.
That's exactly right.
That's really great.
But it is always fun. I remember in high school, we'd have get-togethers up there, whether it was from a seminary or other, but even our class reunions, we'd have it up there underneath there. I drove my Jeep up in there. We'd take dates up in there. And we'd build bonfires and roast hot dogs inside of there because it was a little harder to get to back in those days. You only went up Main Street, and then you could go where Skyline is east, but you couldn't go west until...
I think anyone who has grown up here has really fond memories of that place, even if they only went there once or twice.
Yeah.
It's a very special place, and there's a feeling there that's special. And it strikes me now, even this next week, as we're talking, Dixie Days next week, which is in mid-September, that the city will be inaugurating the Sugar Loaf Trail with interpretive signage about the history of the area and why we use the term Dixie and all of that. And that's really a culmination of the work that you started more than 20 years ago with the trail systems and all the things that we enjoy now.
I'm excited about going up there. I'll be out of the country while they do that because I had planned this a year ago, and now Dixie Days is there, and I'm glad to see them have a Dixie Days. And then that trail system across there that goes over to the Desert Garden, the most popular park that we actually have in the community. I've talked to them about putting some up above there where you can go up and see the whole county and around there and interpret the whole county, because that is certainly something centered in our community. And it started out with the college and the high school together. And you may not know this, but right in front of the Children's Museum, which was the old original Dixie Academy, there's a monument there that Rotary has actually put some funds in to raise money to put in the history of education in St. George, where it started in tents. And then, because it was the first thing that those pioneers came in the encampment mall, you go up, you'll see on one side a woman sitting with a wagon wheel teaching the children. On the other side, you see somebody with a sextant and shovels indicating industry. That was at the head of these people when they come down here, education, to educate our youth, and all of the emphasis that went in there to keep that together. And it was Dixie people that did that. They put forth money, they put forth effort to actually make education the center of all of our lives here in Washington County.
Dan, going back to the Sugar Loaf, and we both have very just fond, and I would even say sacred memories of that place and how special it is. But how do you maybe share with us some of your special memories of boyhood here? Maybe what it is that made you a true, or that ingrained in you that Dixie spirit.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I was born in 1948, March the 8th, 1948, and in the old McGregor Clinic. It's no longer there. There's an office building there. But anyway, I grew up, and my grandfather's house was the first house east of 200 East. Mayor Dan McArthur. It was on the corner of 500 East and 100 South. The house is still there. It's been renovated in the family. And I just remember going up the street and going up to the Red Hill and playing. We also played in our neighborhoods because you'd have these. We actually had clod fights between a neighborhood next to us, and we'd play in the backyard, and pretty soon it'd get into there, everyone throwing clods back and forth and everything. And then in that vacant lot in between us, there's baseball games and everything else. We shot bows and arrows. We lived among it used to be a big vineyard. My house that I built just after I was born was a basement house. It didn't have a top on it or anything. It just had 3 bedrooms and a bathroom and a living room. And I just remember growing up and enjoying the neighborhood and what was out. I went out and hunted birds with my BB gun when I was young. And I had people get mad at me for shooting the birds. And my dad used a flipper, and he showed us how to make flippers with surgical tubing and the old ash tree. You'd cut it out of an ash tree and cut the middle out and then roll it over and wire it together and put it in your oven and bake it at 400 degrees for a while. And then you get some balloons and tie these elastic things together and cut up an old pair of shoes, and that would made a good flipper. And they were good at it. Dad, he could knock the head off a sparrow at 50 feet. And I saw that, and I just loved that. And I loved going hiking all over the place, down towards Bloomington. There was nothing out there, just some old farms and other things that had been abandoned. And we'd go down there and hunt arrowheads. Or we'd go over and climb up on top of Shinobkai over by Washington. And there was actually a big kind of an alder mound of rocks up there. And later there was a place where there and down south of St. George where the airport was, there's these squares with arrow that the pilots didn't have anything really to tell them in radios, so they'd circle around there and they'd point to the next one. They'd go over to Shinobkai, and then they'd go from there up in the cut towards Cedar City. There's one up there, and I found a lot of those because I saw what was around this community all over the place that we loved. We did a lot of things. The armory was just through the block from us, and we'd go over there and play, and then Worthen Park and the baseball and the Sun Bowl. Lots of things in there. I have a very fond memory, but one that probably was not good for everybody. With some other kids, we stole some pop out of when the rodeo was coming on, and one of the kids was young enough where they had the stands up there. We could pull a board out, and he handed us out a root beer or something else, and we drank. We'd go over and sit down in the place where they'd have the pillows and all that and jump in that little stable. And then
I'm sure you've made that right with the Lions Club since.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We got straightened out because down the home, here come a fellow in our neighborhood, and he turned around and come back and caught us, and had hidden the bottles. And he took us around to find those bottles. And then after that, we had to go down and sit on the curb by the Sun Bowl while they had a police officer come over and lecture us about crime and what we'd be if we hadn't done it. And my hat goes off to Sheldon Bergeson that did that years and years ago, but it hung heavy in my mind what was right and what was wrong. But here was a person that knew us. He didn't look the other way. He got all of us, and there was like 6 or 7 of us in that one little skirmish thing. I probably shouldn't even share that, but it's meant a lot of things in my life, one of them, about the law and the importance of us being rightful citizens.
That's a great example of growing up in a small town and what you learn in those kinds of situations with people who really become your mentors as you're growing up. And I'm sure that's true in all places, but it's particularly true here where that we grow up with such good people around us, and that really ingrains in us that spirit of wanting to do good.
Yeah, and so many things in our life that has made a lot of difference. The people, you look at Uncle Spence Esplin. He's not really my uncle or anything, but his uncle, Ron Cottam, Uncle Ron, Uncle Leon up the next door. All these people, Uncle Jim Wade, all these people was in our neighborhood we knew were just part of our family, and we were welcomed by them too, and they watched out after us, and they had to straighten us out sometimes because we're not perfect, but they helped us become who we are, and they helped this community become what this community is. So growing up was just fun in my neighborhood. We shot bows and arrows, and we'd hide them in the grapevines and then shoot them, and then we'd go out in that big vacant lot, and we'd shoot the arrow straight up in the air and then hunker down and wonder where it's going to hit. And none of it ever hit us, but it sure could have. That was not very wise, but that's some of the things we do as kids.
Speaking of not very wise, wisdom came as you grew up. But as a boy, did you ever imagine that you'd be mayor of this city?
Yeah, I never even thought about it. I knew the mayors from Bill Barlocker on, but that didn't hit me until I watched a movie that's my favorite movie is Follow Me Boys by a Disney movie. And it was about a scoutmaster, Lem, that wanted to be a lawyer or something. He studied these books, and he liked this one woman he saw, and he volunteered, and he talked about a scout troop, and he became the scout leader, and it went on. And at the end, he was going to retire. That's what he had done all his life in that community, and everybody knew him, and he had made a great scout camp, and they wanted to honor him. And when it come to the very last thing, they had a parade for him, and he was out there in this parade, and here come a truck down there from one of the persons that was one of the littlest, tiniest, not very important young man that was part of that troop, had become the governor. And they'd asked him to come speak, and he was speaking about what Lem had done for them in all these years. And so that movie, I think that did instill. And my dad was on the city council for 8 years, and he always used to say, boy, if I was mayor, I'd do this. Oh, I'd do that. When I put that in mind, and finally one day I said, I might as well put my name in there. I'd been a bishop, and Scott Hershey was going to be the replacement for me, and so he was running for city council. We just swapped places. He became the bishop of the ward. I ran for city council, and the rest was history.
Wow. And is there a Lem for you? You've mentioned several.
There's many. Art Paxman, Art Wilcox, anyway, excuse me. My next door was a Paxman, and he did lots with Indians, but people, Tom McArthur, my uncle, he was one of our scoutmasters, and one that could just keep us boys on the edge of our seats and take us out and spend time with us, hiking, camping overnight, fishing, doing a lot of things like that. So all of these people I had in my mind. My dad was really my biggest. He was a hard worker. My mother had rheumatic fever, and he had to work, but I could hear his welder going outside the window early in the morning and late at night, and he'd come in and always have a family prayer and around the table, and would kneel around Mom's bed, and that miracle happened that she was able to survive being 6 months pregnant, first woman in the world being 6 months pregnant, and survived that when they didn't do that back in 1956. And so people like that and all the people around us that supported people with trials and tribulations and loved you and even maybe gave you a hug here and there, that's what made this growing up like you, going up to OK Rubber Welders, sitting in those tires and listening to Phil Squire and listening to all of those people, Eldon and your father, tell those stories. That's what got me.
And I even remember your father there, and you were probably with him telling stories. Talk a little bit about your dad. Eldon McArthur is a legend in this community, maybe the hardest working guy, but also fun-loving and just an amazing person.
He was a great supporter. I remember Walt Brooks was the coach of our team, and when we was over at the old practice field over there by that market, where we played on the salt grass, really. We didn't have any grass over there as in football. And I go and I say, Dad, all the other dads come down there and talk to him, and they play, and he plays those boys. But I don't get to do all that all the time. And he said, Walt is a good person. He's one of my best friends, and I'm not going to go do anything like that. I will not miss a game. I will be there, and you could hear him. We're up and down the lane in the Sun Bowl. Doesn't matter where it was or in the basketball games. You could hear my father hollering out, calling Skinny McArthur. That was a wrong call, Skinny. You could just hear it. And Dad was just that way. He always spoke loud. He always had a good story to tell. And he loved the neighborhood, and he loved St. George, but he loved his family so much, and he was such an example to me, especially with my mother and all the trouble. That's where probably my greatest hero was my father, even though he was probably the one that gave me more lickings than anybody else.
Your dad and all of the people that you've mentioned, they were part of that greatest generation.
Yeah.
They'd been to war. They'd lived through as young people through the Depression and all of that. And it's just amazing. I feel like we're blessed that we were raised by that greatest generation.
I'll just tell you one other thing about my dad. In the backyard was just a bunch of parts of cars, iron, other things. It was out by the coal bin that we had. That's how we heated our place. And my mother was always complaining, Eldon, you got to clean that up. And he says, Mom, that is what is your bread and butter, because times are tough and we don't make a lot, but I can go out and pick something out of there and I bring it in and use it, and that's what puts food on the table on these other things. It doesn't bring the bigger jobs in, but it brings in all these others, and I can always help somebody else by finding things there. Finally did clean it up when he got older, but he didn't retire very much. He was still going to work when he was 85. And called Weldon Eldon.
You seem to be following that same pattern. You're supposed to be laying in a hammock sipping lemonade right now, but you're here you've been welding this morning in the shop.
Yeah, I was fixing that old Mack truck for Harry Lundine's wreck at Dixie Diesel, but for Aaron Lundeen, he asked me to do it. So we spent time yesterday and today fixing a few more links on it.
That's awesome. Let me, as we finish out here, Dan, maybe talk about you. We talked about your boyhood. We talked a little bit about your time as mayor. You've now been you've been out of that part of your life for a while. You've served as a mission. You and your wife have served as mission presidents in Mexico, and you're now serving in the temple, but you're going to work every day, and you have all of these things going on. But as you look back, especially at those years as mayor, what is it that you're most proud of? And I know pride or proud is not necessarily the word, but what makes you feel good about your public service?
It was the people I worked with all the time. Gary Esplin was a city manager, and he was hired before I come on board. We just fought on the basketball court, pushed each other around. And when I got elected, I had a meeting with him, and he said, if we can't get along, then I'll resign. And I said, no, let's meet together, Gary. Become one of my best friends, really a great individual, but what a leader in our community. And then all the people that served on there, fun people, Larry Gardner, Bobby Watcott. I shouldn't go on. I'll probably forget some of them, but Gloria Shakespeare, Mona Given. I served with Randy Wilkinson and John Allen early, and also Sharon Isom. And Carl Brooks was a great mayor that loved our community, and people knew him because he just knew history, and he was related to Juanita Brooks and others, and we heard lots of good stories. It didn't matter where we went, and if we went somewhere to another community, another state, he'd know people walking down the street, or they'd know him because he's just so well known. So it's those kind of things, those people that I worked with, and particularly the council. We didn't agree on everything, but when we got together and finally picked a decision, we looked at things and says, if this is good for families, we're going to be behind it. If it doesn't, it's not as important. And it's because the trails was the first thing, and then we did a recreation bond that the community got behind 82% to pass that. We did it for a year and took the input from all of the different groups, whether it was baseball, pickleball. Well, I didn't have pickleball much, but it was lawn bowling and tennis and baseball and all those different things, and trails and hiking. Then we put together a plan, and when Gary and I met, the council had set aside $12 million. We went for $18 million, because if we're going to have something here, it's going to be first class, and particularly the trails, because trails, it's hard to put trails next to people, but people, if you build a trail, they'll put it next to the trail, and they'll put the fence and gate in, and that's what we did. Is we picked around the place. There's a lot of stories about that. There's about roads that happened here, about the airport. There's so much in history I've been involved in 20 years of my life was that. I'm just amazed at the people that I worked with, whether it was the staff, the police department, fire department. That's what made our community what it is, those people. And they all gave back, and they weren't seeking a lot. No, we didn't get paid much when we were there, and I never ever got it more than what I started with as a mayor. Never changed. I never wanted more or asked for more, because this was my community. And I wanted to give everything I could back to that community and make it be part of it, what it is today. So when I drive around, there's only 3 stoplights when I became mayor, but when I ended, there's over 60. And that's because our community was growing so fast, and the people that was doing the planning was way out ahead of the growth in that particular time. And the council was supportive of it, and that's what made our community, was those people that served. Not, I just happened to be in that spot that spoke, and the council would bet whether I'd sing a song or quote a poem, because I love both. And it's been an honor to be there, and it is to be an honor of our community, and to be associated with folks like you. And Dr. Booth was my doctor and for a long time, and some really special things that I can't talk about with him that makes it very special to me.
And speaking of Dr. Booth, that I know that for so many of us, that flag at the top of Main Street is pretty special.
Beautiful. Yeah, he was a special man. You'd see him ride around on that little bike, and he wore a helmet, thank heavens, but he was everywhere. I remember the one time I was on the city council, we was having a dinner up in Pine Valley, and he saw me holding my side, and he said, "Dan, I want to see you back in the room here just a few minutes." So we went back in there, and he poked me a little bit, and he said, "I want to see you down the hospital in 30 minutes. I think you got appendicitis." And so we went down to the hospital, and there, when he come out there, he said, "Your blood count isn't like it is, but I know that it's appendicitis, and it's acute." And so he went in there, and what do you think? Dr. Fossen and him come in, they gave me a blessing before we went in and had the surgery, and everything turned out, and it was. He said if that would have ruptured, you would have been in a lot of trouble, because it would have done that later that night. Yeah. And that Dr. Booth, always looking out for you and your patients. He was an ideal doctor, but what a person for looking at the community and supporting the community. Married a girl right around the corner from where I lived, Maureen, and he just stands out in my mind as one of those people that had the Dixie spirit and never let it die. He was right in the front all the time, whether he's on his bicycle or whether he's out financially. He gave back to the community and in those things, but he was a true Dixieite.
That's awesome. Dan, there's so much we could talk about, and I know that we're going to have you back. There's other topics and things and future episodes that we'd love to have you back and talk more, because you have so much to share. We need to bring this to a close today, but as we've been talking here, I keep going back to Charles Walker's line, St. George ere long will be a place that everyone admires, and you and that awesome Dixie spirit that you carry have played as big a role as anyone that I know of in making this a place that everyone admires.
It certainly was. St. George was only 5 or 6 years old when Brigham Young come down and Charles put those words together. He wrote a lot of other fun things too. Dearest children, God is with you. Another point, because he had lost a daughter. There's always a story behind a poem, a song and the lyrics, and the other thing. There's a story behind all of them, and those stories are inspiring to me, and I love to hear them. I love to quote them sometimes because it makes a lot of difference in our community when you find people that care about other people and they're not caught up just in themselves and the pride they have or other things that they want to give back. That's what makes the Dixie spirit and has made our community what it is today. Not just one or two, but all of those, starting with those that come down here in November, December of 1861, and then the rest of those people that have come since then that we welcomed and said, we can grow. We're not going to lose the quality of life if we just make sure we keep that up. We want to have things that our kids want to do. And the trail system was one. Had to have 45 plus miles of trail when I ended that 20 years because we only had 4 when I started, and we had more than that. Now they're way over that. And that one trail they're doing around the Sugar Loaf is going to be a great one with the stories that are told there that you and I know that Elder Snow put together and added a lot. I hope they have a good one on the Sugar Loaf.
Yes. Dan, thank you so much. We're blessed that you have shared some stories with us today. And we know that it's just the tip of the iceberg that we've talked about. But thank you for being here and thank you for who you are.
Thank you. Been an honor.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. We came to Dixie